Welcome to Lessons 12 and 13, Language and Literacy Instructional Standards, Evaluation and Assessment, grades pre-K through 7. Be sure to read the different ways that you can use to maximize your learning through thinking about the course content and taking notes. The following are the lesson objectives for this sequence of lessons. Describe the elements of concepts of print described in the Common Core State Standards and relate them to future reading success. 2. Show various ways to use phonological awareness and phonics in a reading program. 3. Explain key findings from the National Early Literacy Panel. And 4. Identify the NAEYC's assessment criteria for young children. There are many experts in the field of early childhood literacy and language. Tim Shanahan and Mari Clay are two of them. The following are some preview points to ponder to help you recall your previous knowledge, your previous experiences, and perhaps your previous ideas or conceptions of literacy. And you can test these against the ones that are put forth through the series of PowerPoints. Number 1, if you were on the panel to write the Common Core State Standards, reading standards, what reading skills, knowledge, and processes would you make sure are included? 2. What skills, knowledge, and processes do you think should be included in an early literacy program? That's a literacy program that occurs before kindergarten. This slide shows you the goals of the Common Core State Standards related to reading foundational skills for grades kindergarten and grade 1. At the top is the link to go right directly to the Core Standards site that relates to this information. One of the Common Core goals is to develop proficient readers, remember proficient readers, those on grade level, with the capacity to comprehend a wide range of texts in various disciplines. Another goal is to teach students what they need to learn and not what they already know. Think about that one. That's an important one that we've talked about earlier. Teach students what they need to learn and not dwell on what they already know. Sometimes we slow down the pace of our instruction and perhaps don't advance the students as quickly as they are able to be advanced. The last goal is to discern when particular children or activities warrant more or less attention. So that those two goals are very much connected. The Common Core State Standards Reading Foundational Skills begins with the concepts of print. And this has to do with the organization of print and the basic features of print. Though it begins before kindergarten, well before kindergarten, by the time children reach kindergarten, they should have a pretty good grasp of these concepts. And if they do not, as a kindergarten teacher, these would be some of the concepts that you would want to make sure, and skills that you want to make sure that they feel very comfortable with and are able to do. They need to know that in English, they're going to read the words left to right and top to bottom. They need to recognize that words are represented in written language by a specific sequence of letters. Now, what we could also say about that is they need to recognize that words are represented in written language by an alphabetic code, because the alphabet is nothing more than a code that represents speech sounds. Another concept of print is to understand that words are separated by spaces in print. This is a concept that may go unrecognized by us as being important because we are so familiar with seeing those spaces and knowing that each space between words represents the start of a new word. In fact, look at this particular sentence, understand that words, etc., you will notice the spaces between each of the words. Children don't recognize those spaces, and so therefore they wouldn't be able to isolate the words that they're reading. Recognize and name all upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. It's a very important concept of print that has been recognized within the last 20 years or so as being extremely important for later reading success. Now, they not only have to be able to recognize and name the lowercase and the uppercase letters, but this has to become automatic to the children. And so this is something that they will be working on over and over again, not through boring drill, but through developmentally appropriate encounters with the letters that we've talked about before, such as swatting them, singing them, saying them in poems, marching on them, and many, many other ways. Concepts of print in first grade moves to the sentence level, where they start recognizing distinguishing features of a sentence, and that would include the ending punctuation. This is the third slide on essential reading foundational skills that are in the Common Core State Standards. Phonological awareness. We have talked about phonological awareness quite a bit leading up to this. And keep in mind too, as you're thinking of those language arts strands, that phonological awareness really comes under the language arts strand of listening, not reading. It's a skill that supports reading, but phonological awareness itself is listening. Phonological awareness is the understanding of spoken words, syllable, and sounds, and those individual speech sounds are called phonemes. In kindergarten, they start by recognizing and reproducing rhyming words. They should be able to count, pronounce, blend, and segment syllables in spoken words. And one other good way to help them with the syllables in spoken words is to have them place their hand under their chin and count the number of times their chin drops as they say a word. Each time the chin drops during the pronunciation of a word, they can count those as syllables. So, cat, chin drops once. Kitten, your chin drops twice. Children should also be able to blend and segment onsets and rhymes of single syllable words. Onsets and rhymes are the words that are in word families, such as cat, mat, hat. You can have two consonants making one sound, such as ship, and then you could have tip with one consonant. And so it's not the orthography or the letters that we're looking at. We are segmenting sounds, the beginning sound, and then the rhyme is the part of the word that starts with the vowel. We are continuing our discussion on the reading foundational skills that are found in the Common Core State Standards. Phonological awareness, of course, we now know is a very, very important pre-reading skill that kindergarten students must learn. It's all sound. It has nothing to do with letters. It's the sounds of speech. In speech, they should be able to isolate and pronounce the initial, medial vowel, and final sounds, which are those individual phonemes. Listen to the initial, medial, and final sounds when I say the word cat. K, a, t, k, at, cat. In three phoneme consonant vowel consonant words such as cats that do not include endings that end with ul, or x. This children should be able to make these identifications very easily. However, in words that end in ul, that sound is a little bit different than the words that begin with the ul sound, and it makes it more difficult for them to hear. And so these words, you should note as a teacher that these words would be given special attention. Words ending in the sound That has to do with the sound taking in the vowel sound as well, and we call it vowel controlled R. And the sound for ks, ks. How many sounds do you hear in that when you're reading, when you are listening to the word fox? Fox. How many sounds do you hear at the end? You hear 2 sounds. That would be the k, s sound. And that may be more difficult for children who are expecting to hear a single sound in words. So think of fox and think of cat, and how much easier it would be to identify that final ending sound in cat. They should also be able to add phonemes, add sounds, and substitute individual sounds in simple one-syllable words to make new words. And using nonsense words is a perfectly acceptable way to have children listening for the sounds in words. So when you have them substituting individual sounds, say for the word cat, then they could substitute for that initial sound an for the word mat, an for the word rat, f for the word fat, or they could substitute ul for the word lat. Now lat may be considered a nonsense word. It's something that does not relate to words that they would know. And so they don't have to be known words to the children. You're simply getting them to substitute individual sounds. They could also add sounds. You could start with the root at. How many words can you make from at? And again, they're going to add the k and the and the ul and the b, etc. Because phonological awareness is such an important pre-reading skill, Common Core State Standards provides many, many different types of tasks that students should be able to accomplish, listening to the sounds of their language and speaking the sounds of their language. Kindergarten children should be able to distinguish long from short vowel sounds in spoken single syllable words. For example, the a in cat and the a in cake. They should also be able to orally produce single syllable words by blending sounds, including consonant blends. For example, with the word family at, they could have a flat, where you have a blend ul, two consonants blending together into flat. They should isolate and pronounce initial, medial, vowel, and final sounds, phonemes, in spoken single syllable words. And they should be able to segment spoken single syllable words into their complete sequence of individual sounds, phonemes, such as the word ship, ship. There are 3 phonemes in that word. Now, this list of words of phonological awareness tasks may sound confusing if you read them all at once, and they all sound similar perhaps. Their meanings may start blending together on you. They certainly have done that on me. I would stop the slide, I would pause this, and I would think of examples for each one of these different types of phonological awareness tasks, so that you're able to get a good understanding. These tasks are very important to your children. This is your content knowledge that you need for teaching, and you need to have a very clear understanding of what each of these tasks would be. We have been discussing the sounds of our language, the phonological and phonemic awareness sounds that children must possess in order to become fluent and good readers. We are now moving into the next level where we add the symbols, the letters of our language to those speech sounds. This would be phonics and word recognition, still at the kindergarten level. Children in kindergarten should know and apply grade-level phonics and word analysis skills in decoding words. They need a basic knowledge of one-to-one letter-sound correspondence. They need to associate the long and short sounds with common spellings, which are graphemes, for the 5 major vowels. Kindergarten children should be able to read common high-frequency words by sight. How do you determine what a high-frequency word is? Well, obviously, it's a word they're going to encounter frequently in print and in, such as books, classroom signs, etc. But I think also sight words could include those high-frequency words that are decodable, but the children have not yet learned how to decode them. In kindergarten, they're going through a very sequential tasks of first identifying speech sounds, learning the letters that represent those speech sounds, and then being able to decode words. And some words that are decodable may be too difficult for children at this stage in their development, in which case high-frequency decodable words are perfectly appropriate to include on your list, and you indeed will see them included. As children become more proficient with decoding, I would eliminate those words that could be decoded from the high-frequency list and have those words just be ones that they cannot decode easily. But at the beginning, put all high-frequency words on a chart, teach those to the children, and that way they have some words memorized under their belt that they can apply to the early reading tasks that you have them do. Finally, children should be able to distinguish between similarly spelled words by identifying the sounds of the letters that differ. If at any point during the listening to and viewing of the slides on the PowerPoint, especially in this particular series of lessons, there are some concepts or some of the tasks that we're talking about that might sound a little confusing because they are very closely related in some instances. Do take time to pause the slides and to think about each one. Use that metacognition that we are encouraging our children to use in order to have a very, very solid understanding of what is expected for the children at each progression. For first grade, children should be able to know the spelling sound correspondences for common consonant digraphs. A digraph are two letters that represent one speech sound, such as in the word chip. The two letters that begin the word chip are CH, and together they represent one speech sound, ch. Children should decode regularly spelled one-syllable words. First grade children should know the final E and common vowel team conventions for representing long vowel sounds. Children should use knowledge that every syllable must have a vowel sound to determine the number of syllables in a word. First grade children should be able to decode two-syllable words, and they should be able to read words with inflected endings. Inflected endings such as S, such as ED, such as ING change the meaning of the root word slightly. Children should be able to recognize and read grade-appropriate, irregularly spelled words. Continuing with our discussion of the foundational reading skills that children learning to read must possess, we are now looking at the progression of skills for second grade children. Second grade children should be able to distinguish long and short vowels when reading regularly spelled one-syllable words. They should know spelling sound correspondences for additional common vowel teams. They should be able to decode regularly spelled two-syllable words with long vowels. Second grade children should be able to decode words with common prefixes and suffixes. And they should be able to identify words with inconsistent but common spelling sound correspondences. Children should also recognize and read grade-appropriate, irregularly spelled words. Now again, this is a lot of information, and it is up to you to read each one, think about what it means, think of examples for it, so that you will be able to see where you're taking your kindergarten children and your first grade children and what your second grade children should be able to do. Looking at the third grade developmental stages of learning those reading foundational skills, children should be able to identify, third grade children should be able to identify and know the meaning of the most common prefixes and derivational suffixes of words. They should be able to decode words with Latin suffixes. They should be able to decode multi-syllable words. And if you recall, we started back with those very simple, stable one-syllable words such as cat, and now they are, by the third grade, able to decode multi-syllable words. They should also be able to read grade level appropriate, irregularly spelled words. Mostly phonics and phonological awareness skills are taught in an intense way for children in pre-K through grade 3. However, there are some expectations that you would have for your students as they progress through the upper grades. One of those is the use of combined knowledge of all letter sound correspondences, syllabication patterns, and morphology. And morphology simply refers to the roots and affixes of words. And they are to read accurately unfamiliar multisyllabic words in and out of context. So by the time a child or a student reaches 4th and 5th grades, they should be able to apply all those foundational skills that they learned in the earlier grades. And if you recall from other research, it's important to identify areas of weakness in the phonological awareness processing and in the matching of the sounds to the letters of language. And you would start with identifying the needs of the students and trying interventions to help them catch up. But it is much more difficult for older students to catch up on decoding words, hearing sounds and words, in which case you would have to move to other interventions other than decoding. But if they are able to do the list of things here that you see on this slide, you know that these children have progressed normally in their phonological awareness and their phonics development, and they should be able to tackle new words without much difficulty. All right, looking backward to kindergarten again, to those lower grades, but moving away from phonological awareness and phonics, we're going to focus on fluency and what is expected at the kindergarten and grade 1 levels as far as children having fluency in reading. Kindergarten children should be able to read emergent reader texts with purpose and understanding. And emergent reader texts are those very simple leveled texts that would contain words that they are able to read with support perhaps, but they should be able to understand the words and what they read. Fluency in first grade, they should be able to read with sufficient accuracy and fluency to support comprehension, so it's a little bit deeper level of understanding. They should be able to read on-level text with purpose and understanding, and they should be able to read on-level text orally with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression. First grade children should also use context to confirm or self-correct word recognition and understanding. Considering the Common Core State Standard reading foundational skills for second grade, we have moved into fluency. Second grade students should be able to read on-level text with purpose and understanding. They should be able to read on-level text orally with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression. And they should use context to confirm or self-correct word recognition and understanding. And as you can see, the progression of skill development is quite gradual between first and second grade. Fluency for grades 3 through 5. Again, think about the progression that started down in kindergarten as you look at these particular degrees of reading fluency for children in grades 3 through 5. They should be able to read on-level text with purpose and understanding, read on-level prose and poetry orally with accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression. And so that accuracy, appropriate rate, and expression now has been expanded into different genres of reading. Use context to confirm or self-correct word recognition and understanding. So you will see some similarities and some differences as well as the children progress through the grades. These points to ponder about the Common Core State Standards for reading are really to have you notice and understand the progression of reading skills and how they start with the sounds of language and end up with the fluency and the comprehension. So what I would suggest you do to make sense of all of this is to select a grade level, perhaps one that you're teaching or intend to teach, or all of the grade levels if you want to see how they extend from the very youngest children up through the children through grade 5, and create a checklist of basic reading skills that the students must master for their grade levels, considering starting with the concepts of print, moving into the phonological and phonemic awareness, moving into letter naming and letter recognition and attaching those to the sounds, and then learning words, either recognizing them through decoding or sight words, and then into fluency. And notice all of things in the progression and the level of emphasis that you as a teacher would have on each of these areas. Second of all, analyze and discuss perhaps with other teachers, with each other on the discussion board. Discuss the introduction of skills and their progression from low to high grades. We're now shifting our focus a little bit away from specific foundational skills that children need in order to become successful readers. And we want to look at what two very prominent and eminent groups of people say about early literacy in general. The first one is from the report of the National Early Literacy Panel on ways that children develop early literacy. They address questions that are related to areas of childhood development that should be identified and assessed. And some of the questions are, what are the skills and abilities of children birth to age 5 that predict later reading, writing, or spelling outcomes? Which interventions or procedures contributed to or inhibited gains in reading skills? What environments contributed to or inhibited gains in reading skills? And what child characteristics contributed to or inhibited gains in reading skills? You should click on the website above in order to read the questions and the surrounding information, because the answers to these questions are critical for teachers of young children. They need to know the skills that children must acquire, and they need to know what inhibits their acquisition of these skills. This is the second slide on key findings from the National Early Literacy Panel. Necessary components of literacy, and by the way, literacy is defined as reading and writing text. So it deals obviously with the letters with the written code. The necessary components include decoding, oral reading fluency, reading comprehension, writing, and spelling. Variables that strongly correlate with later literacy are alphabetic knowledge, phonological awareness, rapid automatic naming of letters or digits, digits meaning numerals, and they refer to this in the literature as RAN. Rapid automatic naming of objects, colors, and sequences of random sets of pictures or objects. Writing letters in isolation or writing one's name. Phonological memory, remembering spoken information. Again, I urge you to look at this list, make sure you understand each of these variables and can think of examples for it before moving on to the next slide. We're continuing discussing the key findings from the National Early Literacy Panel, and these are more variables that moderately correlate with later literacy. Concepts about print knowledge, combination of alphabet knowledge, which is referred to as AK, and concepts of print and early decoding. Reading readiness, a combination of alphabet knowledge, concepts of print, vocabulary, memory, and phonological and phonemic awareness. Another variable is the oral language of children, their ability to produce or comprehend spoken language. And we know from the Hart and Risley studies that their earliest abilities to produce and comprehend spoken language and written language has to do with the number of words they've heard in their home. Visual processing ability is the ability to match or discriminate visually presented symbols, such as letters. The recommended instructional practice from the National Early Literacy Panel include code-focused interventions. By code focus, the code, of course, are the letters, the alphabet letters that our students learn and use. Another instructional practice that's recommended is shared reading interventions, parent and home programs, teaching parents instructional techniques, and we have discussed the importance of family in the education of young children at school. Another recommendation has to do with solid preschool and kindergarten programs, language enhancement interventions. For your points to ponder, they're built on the statement that exposing children from birth to oral and written language is critical for their future success in reading and writing, and that has certainly been shown by research. In light of that research, review the recommendations from the National Early Literacy Panel and determine one way that you can informally assess children on each of the recommended areas of literacy. And then think about one formal assessment that you can also use for each of the recommended areas of literacy, because you need to document your students' areas of weaknesses and strengths so that you can build a program for them that will meet their needs and help them to grow as readers and literate people. Here's a little test that you can take to test your content knowledge related to early literacy. Remember, the teacher makes such a big difference in the education of children, a bigger difference really than the type of program or textbooks that are adopted. And so from time to time you want to engage in this metacognitive style activity where you think to yourself, what do I really know? And be honest about that. And then you can find more related information. A lot of it is actually contained in the resources for this class, and you can go beyond that online to find information to fill in your gaps of knowledge. So what do you know about child development and learning for children ages birth to 5? And how do you think the social and cultural context in which children live impact their literacy development? Go back and look at the Hart and Risley research and the interviews related to that. Go back and think about some of the things that we've talked about related to family. What resources can you use to increase your knowledge on young children and their literacy development? By the way, this is just a self-test for yourself. You will not be turning it in, you will not be graded, but it certainly is something that will help you check for your own learning and understanding. The National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, has puts out a lot of potential position statements. The one that you have access to right above is a position statement entitled Developmentally Appropriate Practice in Early Childhood Programs Serving Children from Birth through Age 8. And so I have summarized a position statement that is about, counting references and all, is 31 pages into 2 slides. So you must go online, access this in order to get a complete understanding of what their recommendations are. They do begin on page 22, but the pages that lead up to that give you critically important information on early literacy for young children. Now, moving into their recommendations, they have recommendations based on assessment of children, and that is you must use ongoing purposeful assessment. It's not enough to just be looking out over the children and picking up clues here and there, but you want to be specifically looking for certain benchmarks, certain levels of learning. And this should be ongoing and, of course, documented so you don't forget what they are for each child. You need to focus on developmentally and educationally significant goals. Create an assessment system. Use appropriate methods, observations, clinical interviews, collection of children's work, and performance on authentic tasks. Assess what the children can do independently and with assistance. The final slide in this particular sequence of presentations that cover 2 lessons for you has to do again with NAEYC and assessment, and their recommendations continue are continued on page 22. You will get input from families and the children's own evaluations of their work. Sometimes we leave the children out of the evaluation process, but it's important for us to know how they think they're doing. They may underestimate what they have done and the successes that they have demonstrated, or they may overestimate how good they are. And so getting their evaluations of their work is very important, and also brings them into the learning process as well. Use assessments that produce valid and reliable information. Use multiple sources of assessments, and determine appropriate follow-up evaluation and treatments for children with special needs. So these conclude the information, a lot of the information based on the skills that students need to know, the foundational skills for reading, recommendations from 2 very prominent reading organizations for young children. And as you go through this lesson with the PowerPoints, be sure to read the information that is provided for you by the links on some of the slides.